Welcome back to CoindeskLIVE at Consensys 2019. Again, the show floor is filling up. We have folks running, and we are joined. Hold on, John Wolpert. Sorry, I'm trying to get all my things up. I just got the black screen of death here, and we're trying to figure out what the. So I can take your questions for John at hashtag CoindeskLIVE on Twitter. I'm also hanging out in the YouTube room. I just discovered it. It's where people are shilling pretty actively, which is a nice feeling. That's one of the benefits of working in this space, is that everybody talks about everything in awful ways. So you said just a moment ago that blockchain is a nudist colony. Is that something that is a personal goal of yours, or is there?
No, I think it's funny. It's a little bit of blue humor, but it's an apt analogy, and not in a bad way. For executives, for CXOs, for CEOs, it's important to understand what blockchain. When you're dealing with tools, it's good to know what a tool does. Have you ever read Philip Pullman? Philip Pullman had a very good quote in a book called The Subtle Knife, where he says, "A tool has its own intentions."
Okay.
And blockchains have a certain set of intentions of their own. If you use them, you need to know, right? So we got everybody in 2015. When I was at IBM and I was founding IBM, helping co-found IBM Blockchain and Hyperledger, we managed to go from not being able to say blockchain at all in the enterprise to now who doesn't say it, right? And it was a fairly quick pivot from February. A colleague, Paul Brody, who's head of blockchain at Ernst & Young today, said it in February of 2015 in the press. And it was a problem. 5 months later, people like Jerry Cuomo and myself could say it, and Arvind Krishna and others could say it all the time. Ginny Rometty, the CEO of IBM, was saying it. And the change was because we had laid the foundation that blockchain wasn't just about Bitcoin and things that those CEOs at the time were worried about a little bit. Today, we're going to do the same pivot because people now we're a little bit farther down the maturity model. Executives understand a little bit more about what blockchain can and can't do. And now we're ready to lay it out, to say, blockchain really is a nudist colony. You're the only difference between a private blockchain and a public blockchain is whether you're on a private beach or a public beach, right? But if you can get permissioned into that beach, you can see everything. And that's a great tool for some things, and definitely not a good tool for others. So,
So that's an interesting question, and this is something that I'm sure a lot of people have to answer. Wouldn't it be better that if everything was on a blockchain, if everything was completely nudist, all up and down the stack, from financial tech to car token style sorts of ideas, etc. Are we ever going to move away from I'm serving my SQL database somewhere and I don't want to touch a blockchain because I'm afraid somebody's going to see what I'm doing?
Well, I think that see what you're doing part is very important. So how boring would the world be, or how boring would games be if you had to play all your card games with all the cards face up? And so there are reasons why. So if we're playing bridge, I've got my function that allows me to shuffle my cards, right?
Yep.
How I'm shuffling my cards is probably something that I shouldn't show my competitors. That's like a smart contract or just a function, right, in a business logic, right? What my cards say is private state. You're my partner in bridge. I'm going to signal you some things so that we can play tricks. Well, that's shared state, bilateral state, right? So this is unilateral state, now bilateral state. You can't run a blockchain on a bilateral state machine, right? It's by definition you can't do consensus, but we can coordinate. Our competitors should not know that stuff. So you can't put that on a blockchain either. But now I'm going to flip a card. Everybody sees that. Now I've got a new message that says, I just threw an ace. That's shared state. And I can put that on a private blockchain, or I can put it on a public blockchain, depending on what I want. So it's about message passing between what my friend Gary Singh at IBM would call an set of n-lateral state machines. Now that gets into distributed systems, and it's really hard stuff because you have to worry about if my ace came down before your card, and so you have ordering, and you have we have double spend issues, and we have race conditions, deadlocks, all of these sorts of problems. But we have ways of solving it. In the old world, you have MQ series, right, or rapid MQ. So I wonder sometimes if in fact, I think this is maybe apt, that the mainnet's role, is to take what we now have to pay a lot of money for as companies that want to integrate, whether that's creating a blockchain consortium or just integrating because we need to work together. Any system integration, we need to make those things safe without silos. And just like the internet did in 1992, when I was making some money writing stuff that looked a lot like HTTP, a couple of years later, a really inefficient way of doing that. I remember in 93 we were like, oh, well, the internet's too inefficient. It's such an inefficient way of passing messages. No, we'll be making money forever, right? No, of course not. Right? Well, the blockchain mainnet, public mainnet, as a message bus is also pretty inefficient. But if you think about plasmas and other kind of layer 2 technologies, you ultimately get military-grade tamper resistance from the mainnet. Humans have invented the closest thing we've ever come to true tamper resistance, and we still have work to do on that, and we can quibble about that. But the true tamper, you're getting that from a public mainnet. Which one you want to talk about is a matter of preference. But that public mainnet, if I want to coordinate between different state machines, I need a common frame of reference. I need a message bus. And I don't want to have to spend millions of dollars on MQ or on some bespoke solution. I want to just use the stateful internet.
So the goal here is to connect using the bridge analogy, so connect a public blockchain to a lot of private blockchains. Is that so the private would feed in terms of messaging, in terms of that sort of bus?
To be very clear and careful, you aren't going to put compute on that public blockchain. There are still plenty of reasons why you might use a private blockchain, but you could also just have your SAP implementation over here and your Oracle apps implementation over here, and I need to pass messages. I need to throw that trick. I need to turn that. I need to throw my trump card. And now we had shared state. And now, if I'm a CEO, first, what am I hearing? Less cost. Right? I can spend less money on more standardized solutions. I have less system integration problems. Paul Brody said on Friday, we were doing a really fun talk at Ethereal, and Paul said, I'm going to say this forever. He said, look, right now what's happening, my biggest buyer says to me, would you like to join my private blockchain? Mm-hmm. What he's really saying is, would you like to keep doing business with me? Mm-hmm. And then my biggest supplier says, would you like to join private blockchain? And he's saying the same thing. It's a different blockchain. And somebody else. And at some point I just say, just fax me the invoice. Right? So we need to have, if we can have a common message bus where our compute and our data and our transactions are all privately managed, where we have not only tamper-resistant security, but surveillance-resistant security, right? Blockchains aren't very good at surveillance resistance. If you're worried about somebody observing your data, tampering with it's a different matter, but observing it, which I think most people, when they think of security, they're really thinking about whether or not you can see my data. Well, if you're worried about that, you might want to put that on an air-gapped mainframe on a traditional database behind some really good system administrators. You don't want to put that on a blockchain, not a private one or a public one. But you're going to want to use at least a public one to be the message bus between these, and to confer tamper resistance, and also you can't just use the API economy for this, right? Because while I'm shuffling my cards, you need to know that I didn't slip an ace in there. Mm-hmm. So you can't just have an endpoint. You need to have verified, what I'd like to call it, entanglement, right? So I'm not playing shenanigans on you, even though you need to know and shouldn't know some of the things I'm doing behind my cards.
I think that's actually a great point. That's going to be vitally important. We're eventually going to get. I was just listening to a podcast about bit flips, which is basically cosmic rays hitting a transistor, and it flips it to, for example, in Belgium, they gave they there was a voting machine that got bit flipped, and it gave one of the candidates 4,096 extra votes.
Yeah.
And we all know where that came from. That was basically just like the last digit of that transistor, the chip got flipped. So they got 4,096 extra votes, or 92 or whatever.
So you need fault tolerance.
So that sort of fault tolerance
right?
is vitally important in that case. Tell me a little about Web3 Studio. You guys are doing some work over there as well.
Yeah. So my job at Consensys, when I moved from IBM to Consensys, Joe Lubin said, "Hey, would you like to build businesses plural on the next internet?" And that was pretty hard to say no to. And the embodiment for that for me is our little team in Raleigh and Raleigh-Durham, that actually it's expanding out, where we build everything in open source from the beginning. In fact, I think I might even take Paul Brody's suggestion and make it everything not only open source but public domain. Mm-hmm. If Consensys's job is, I've always, my nutshell for Consensys is that we build things so that more people can build more things. Right, which I think is clever, and I think it's a good way of putting the company's mission in a nutshell. Our job is to build audacious, unexpected, novel Lego kits, where we build some Legos in there, and then we give it all away, and we work with the community to build those things from line one of code. So if Hyperledger was I think very notable in its in going open source extraordinarily early for the in historical terms to how we used to do open source. We're taking it to another level. We're going open source, open domain from line one of code, from word one of our narratives. So we'll write a product review from the near future, which you can read on Medium. And our latest one was called Bootleg. Okay. Bootleg is really exciting. We just launched it, and music studios are really every day it seems like I get a new request. They're like, "Hey, we'd like to use Bootleg. Can we use Bootleg?" I'm like, "It's open source.
Yeah, just take it. It's right there.
Steal my car."
Yeah,
so that's my business model. Steal my car.
Steal your car.
Right.
Okay, so I have a quick question I wanted to ask before we go. A young man named John Smith, which I suspect might not be his real name. What about off-chain computation through decentralized oracles? Is that viable in this model?
Well, I think that's last I checked, that's a state machine. And for me, it's all about generalized compute. So I've got a function at and the last time I was writing code, I had to write return. Yep. And I have I've got Boolean true. If parameter is false, return true. Mm-hmm. That's my function, my lambda function or something, right? Okay, well, I've got to take that return, and I don't want to have everybody execute that code, but I do want that message to get over to this thing that's going to take true and turn it false. Mm-hmm. What I don't want is that false to go back into the parameter of my original function, because I've got now a Mobius loop, I've got a block. Okay. So that's the kind of instrumentation that we need on the mainnet. Peter Robinson is a researcher at Pegasus. He's got some great papers on Archive about something he's calling pinning contracts and ephemeral sidechains. There's also lots of good companies now, as you know, working on this basic idea. You've got state channel methods. You've got obviously Plasma and Loom and other ways of doing it. Chainlink does that on an Oracle side of things. I think oracles are a special class of this case. And then Plasma and Lightning are another special class, right? If we can get message passing, then you can get even better and do things like money passing. Mm-hmm. But I think for me, it's leaping straight to the tokeny thing and not considering the generalized compute thing. It's fine. We should do that. But I'm more of a fix the internet guy, and less of a finance guy.
Yeah, I loved your comment. The idea that back in '93, it was too inefficient to use the internet for anything good. And I think we're probably in the same situation right now as well. So John, thank you for joining us.
Blockchain does not have to be, the mainnet does not have to be massively efficient if you have all of these other layers that sit at the coalface of the application. It just has to be that big, slow-moving gear that helps all the other ones time off.
All right, very cool. So, John, thank you for joining us. Web3 Studio. You can steal all John's code just right on the internet here.
Nice.
I'm gonna hop over and I'm gonna start a music studio. We'll do a little bluegrass or something. All All right, perfect. Thank you, John.
Thanks.